Hey, people-centric leaders. We're very excited to have you here today. I realized somebody told me recently, like, I have a podcast voice. Do I have a podcast voice?
That's true. Yeah, you do.
Do we
Yeah.
all have a podcast? I think we all have a podcast voice. Oh, Diana's shaking her head no, but Diana does the introduction to our podcast. And if you know Diana, I listened to that 3 times when Diana recorded it, but I was like, who did did we hire somebody else to do the introduction? Because Diana talks in this really soft voice in the introduction.
That is the fakest voice I've ever used in my life. I do have I call it my secretary voice, like when you're answering phones or doing customer service or whatever. I do have that voice, but I don't use that most of the time on the podcast.
Okay. You also use when you are in that voice, when you say goodbye, bye has 2 syllables to it, which doesn't in your other life. It's
Bye.
bye,
Bye.
bye,
Bye.
bye.
That's real. I do that for real.
Yeah, I know. That's
I'm
what
a
I'm saying.
habit.
That's, that's what I'm saying. So, okay, well, I just heard my own podcast voice that was coming out. So I was trying to break out of it by having a little conversation. So, one of the things that when we travel around and we talk to lots of clients and we go to events and we hear people in real companies doing real situations, which by the way, if you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, we don't say that all the time. Like we get our experience from working with people. So our team, we are not professional podcasters. We're not out here just doing podcasts. We are actually professional consultants. We work with real companies out there. So just throwing that out there for you all. So where are we getting our stuff? We're getting it from day-to-day contacts that we're having with real teams, real people who are struggling with real things. And one of the real things that we hear a lot about are the generational challenges that are happening in the workplace. That's not a new topic at all. That's been a topic that we've talked about for a long time. But for right now, there's 4 distinct generations working in the workforce, and some would say even 5, and because there are some matures that are still working in the workforce. But the 4 main ones are the boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, and the Gen Zs. And I was going from oldest to youngest on that. And the matures are older than the boomers, if you hear us talking about the mature generation. But we're deep into the Gen Zs. A lot of boomers will say they use the term millennial for anybody younger. And that's not true. The millennial generation now, most of them are in their 30s and late 30s. The earliest Gen Z generation are starting to hit their late 20s and even 30 in that generation. But they're hitting the workforce strong. And we're in the middle of that generation, which means like some of the trends of the Gen Z generation are really hitting hard. And so Diana saw an article, or not an article, a video, a reel. What do they call it? Instagram reel? Is that what they call it? An Instagram? An
Your boomer
Instagram.
is
I was
showing.
gonna
Just
say,
stop.
speaking of generations,
I'm highlighting this. She received an Instagram from from somebody. So you received an Instagram. So the courier brought you an Instagram from Western Union. Is that how that worked?
No, I rented it from a box where you just go and push a button and a CD pops out. It was a
Oh,
red.
like a red box, like you're
Yeah.
in a movie. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Totally understand that. All
Yep.
right. So you opened this Instagram from someplace and it told you somebody wrote something about how Gen Zs coming into the workplace are struggling in some areas. They're lacking some knowledge. They're not being prepared for the workforce the way that they need to be prepared for.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a reel. That's what happened. I saw a reel that was talking about how they were the reel was kind of frustrated with education because they felt like they weren't educating young people to go into the workforce. So it was saying like an uneducated educational system is making uneducated employees. And it was talking about the areas that they're uneducated, quote unquote. And it was things like problem solving and completing tasks to fruition, like completion, totally complete. Getting knowing where to start and what to do. So it was just like really big things that are also really necessary and basic. And if you guys know me, I started my career in vocational education. So it's, very important to me that that students are learning how to be in the workforce. But I do think that that's a tough ask for teachers in the current climate. So I just thought it was like all of my worlds combining and all of my passions there. And I thought it was a good topic for us to talk about and sort of say what happens when we're not teaching our students how to go into a workplace. What's going on there?
And we're getting that question from managers and supervisors. Like we're hearing real examples of that on a regular basis of, hey, they said this, what do I do? What does that look like? And so we've got our own generations here spanned here, I think, pretty well. So we've got Bethany, who represents, she's a hardcore millennial, right?
Yes. Hardcore. 91. Here to represent.
Thanks for coming into work today. That's how you have to talk to millennials. You have to thank them for even
Oh,
basic things. You have to say thanks a
not
lot
at
for
all. Not at all.
thanks for showing up. I see you, I recognize you, and I appreciate you, Bethany.
Wow, thank you, Don.
Yeah, she kind of lit up on that. She knows that I'm kind of giving her grief a little bit right now, but she also kind of lit up. Like a part of her just like, I liked that, but I hated that I liked that.
Hated it.
I see it.
But thanks for seeing me.
No problem. No problem. And then we brought our own Gen Z, right? Philip, you're Gen Z, right? You're in that generation,
Oh
Gen Z.
yeah, that's what the Z and Herzog is for. Gen Z. I'm here and I'm proud of it. Although I really appreciate millennials and all generations. But yes, I am Gen Z.
Okay. So most of this podcast is going to be, what is your problem? We're going to gang up on Philip today a little
That's
bit
right.
and find out
Oh.
what is wrong with you and why are you the way that you are. That's the goal for today.
I'm
So
here for it.
Diana, on this reel that I know you keep saying it was real. We weren't saying it was an imaginary. I know that you're saying it was a real communicate that you got, a real telegram, Instagram that you received. But like, what were some of the examples that were in there about what are Gen Zs not being armed with? Like throw one out and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, so well, I think I can use a scenario. Should I give a scenario that I gave earlier? I should just give that one. Okay. So I had a leader tell me about an incident where a fully educated, college educated person came to them after working in the workforce for a little bit and said, I don't like this coworker. I'm struggling with it. I'm having all of these issues. And the leader was like, great, let's talk through it. Let's coach you how to have conversation. Let's, give good feedback instead of poor feedback. And let's go pull this other coworker in. And the young professional said, I am not going to do that. I will not talk to this other person. That makes me feel unsafe. And the minute that word was said, the leader said, what are you talking about when you say unsafe? I need you to unpack that word. What has happened? Why do you feel that way? Are you in danger of some sort? Have you been harassed in some way? Please tell me what you mean by unsafe. And the young professional said, oh, it would be horribly awkward and I'm uncomfortable with doing what you've suggested we do. I will not be doing that. And the leader kind of sat there for a minute and was like, well, but this is how you solve what you just said, right? I can't solve it for you. This is how you solve it. You have a problem with a coworker, you're frustrated with these things. We've laid out the things. Now we have to go have the conversation. And the young professional was so against it that they just decided to drop it and walked out of the meeting and like wouldn't go further the discussion. And so that young professional is now just going to like be mad, just like be upset in their work. And so it was just an interesting moment for that leader who is a millennial leader and was like, I just don't know how to help now. I don't know what to do now. And so I thought it would be interesting for us to kind of talk through like what is happening there and what should we do.
Yeah, so let's kind of break that down a little bit. So first of all, if somebody comes to you and uses, one of the things that when we talked about this earlier was the term unsafe is an invoking word, and when you hear an employee say unsafe, does that warrant more attention? I guess is the first question.
Yeah, I mean, if any of you came to me and said you don't feel safe, I would immediately panic and be like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you don't feel safe? And to me, that word is very I don't want to say triggering, but to me, it's like that's a word that I'm like, you have invoked something, you have said something serious to me, and I'm immediately listening harder. I don't know. It feels like a very strong word.
I agree. I was going to say, I think there's probably several of those types of phrases that get thrown around. maybe more so with the younger generation, maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to box them in necessarily, but I mean, another example I've had or seen, there was like another term that was like, I'm so like emotionally exhausted, so I can't come to this thing. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, are you okay? Is everything all right? What happened? And it was the same kind of thing where I was like, what, like that could be like a really significant thing. Was there something major that happened in your life? Or is this just like what is that? What is the depth of that kind of a statement? So I don't, just throwing that around to be like, I can't show up because of this. I'm so emotionally exhausted, or I don't, yeah. Yeah, I
It-
feel unsafe.
It's almost like when that word is like, when that's dropped, then it's like, clearly I've given you a diagnosis that gives me a pass that for the situation. Like I clearly get to not participate in this because it makes me uncomfortable. Is the gender, so I like what it said about we're talking about this going back to education. Is there something happening in education where we're teaching kids? Are we invoking those things? Where are they learning those words? I didn't learn those. We definitely talked about like safety and stuff in my school, but I don't remember talking about it in such a way where like a kid would say like, well, I feel unsafe in this moment
Yeah.
when that's saying something. Like where's that coming from?
I was gonna say, I don't think I know enough about like what's happening, especially at like a higher education level at this point, to be like, this is for sure how that's, it's set up for them and what they're doing or not doing. I mean, I think that we could put a lot of blame on the education system, but also I think that the education system is not entirely responsible for the outcome of a generation. So I think there's a lot to do with like the parenting as well, and the decisions that are made at home within that too. So just, I'm throwing that out there too.
Thank you, Bethany. Yeah. And I'll say, as a former educator and someone that kind of stays in that circle, because I just think it's really important. There is an emphasis on creating spaces where students feel comfortable expressing whatever they need to express, right? Or creating a space where they feel okay about learning, right? And so maybe it comes from some of that, like there's a big emphasis on, we're going to provide you a safe place, a place where you feel comfortable, a place that encourages you to grow and learn and say what you need to say. So maybe, I don't know.
Philip, I'm curious, as a kind of a representative of the generation and
That's
all
right.
the things that we're talking about that are wrong with all human beings everywhere. What's your problem? That's my question.
That's it. Yeah. Well, I felt so unsafe I couldn't speak. That's why I was on mute with these people. No, no. I think it was even last fall. The reason this is so relevant, we hear it, I think, from all of our clients, and when we go to conferences. Last fall, Gen Z surpassed, in terms of our population of the workforce. There are more Gen Z in the workforce now than there are Boomers. So I think it's like right at a fourth, getting close to a third. In the next 10 years, they'll be the largest demographic in the workforce, with millennials like right behind. So I think what's interesting, for a lot of friends, and when I have a lot of people, I'm involved in our university and alumni, a lot of people just fresh on their career will be like, let's meet. You care about your job and the community. How do you do that? What's next? And sometimes, to Diana's point, it's the simplest things that flub them up. Oh, like, how did you apply to this job? And they sent in, they just did the process online. That's all they need to do. Did you write a cover letter talking about the company you want to work for and why you think you're a good fit with them and they're a good fit for you? What? No, no. I do the same thing 1,000 times and nobody responds to me, different things like that. I think that under the idea of safety too, and we've touched on this, but there's a big difference, I would say, between safety and comfort. And I'm sure that COVID is a piece of it. I'm sure how we socialize is a lot of this. But even when we travel, no matter where we are in the world, I just always like to ask people, do you have these same things? And last year when we were in Scotland at the University of Strathclyde, there was a group of professors we were with just for my wife's work. They all talked about the exact same thing. They said, it is so hard with students. I mean, these are all great people, arts, psychology, and they all spoke to the same problem. We are truly the safest place anyone could ever have a conversation, but our students push back on that saying, I'm uncomfortable, or it makes me nervous to talk about something that someone disagrees with. And so even these professors across the world say, no, we're not teaching you to avoid disagreement. We are teaching you to do these things well. So really safety is to do these things well, where I'm not in jeopardy. And I think when we talk about psychological safety, we try to define that. But these general terms, I think people assume safety means a lack of discomfort and a lack of challenge. And what I would probably, the last thing I would say is to push for what I look for in the world is better examples where we show what challenge looks like in a healthy and safe way, right? Like we can disagree on our team. It's very safe to do that. That's why you pick on me so much, because we're safe with each other. That's what we do with clients. When we disagree with a client, we're not saying a client is stupid or wrong necessarily, but we're asking why and pushing. And that makes us and our clients better.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I hate to just like blame it on technology, but I think that like, I mean, think that's for sure a factor with this too, of like, Gen Z is they've grown up entirely with technology, whereas like millennials were probably like the last generation that can remember life without a computer or a phone in their pocket, right? And so I think that that has a major impact in how they have socialized with people in their lives. And it's way more comfortable to sit behind a screen and type your opinion or to voice your opinion when you don't actually have somebody physically in front of you opposing you. It's a little bit easier to say, oh, I can take however long or not I want to respond to somebody online, or not respond to them and just completely ignore them or ghost them or whatever. And that's how I deal with that conflict. If I don't want to be around somebody, I don't have to be, because technology allows that for me most of the time. And I think schools definitely use technology more than they have before, to help try to engage them and meet them where they're at. And so I don't think that that's necessarily a problem, or they shouldn't be doing that. But I think that that's probably a big part of it too.
Yeah, so I think that we all agree that the leader in Diana's story handled that pretty well. Because when the word unsafe is uttered, you should, as a supervisor, you might look at it and you have to be careful of your own bias. You might look at the person and go, oh, you're a younger person. You're coming to me to complain about something stupid. And you don't hear the person. You don't listen to what they're about to say. But if they use that term, hey, I feel unsafe, you probably need to stop and ask more questions. Why don't you feel safe? What does that mean? Tell me exactly what you're talking about, because there could be a situation that you do need to help them with, that is more serious. If you are a workforce person and you're listening, anybody in the workforce, and you're thinking to yourself, like, safety, is it a safety thing? I don't feel safe, or I feel uncomfortable. Those are two very different words. I heard somebody in the special forces talking about the difference between hurting and being injured. And they said there's a big difference between those two things. If you're injured, like if you literally tore up your knee, you should stop and you should get your knee fixed and let your knee heal back. But if you're just on a long run and your knee just hurts and it's not injured, that's different. And if you confront those two different things and you lean into the pain, then that's one of the things they train you in special forces to be able to do. I think the same thing is true in the workforce. It's funny, Diana, when you talked about setting up for a learning environment has to be safe. Yes, that's true. And everybody has to be comfortable. That's not true. A lot of people show that your best learning occurs outside your comfort zone. Your best opportunities as a human sometimes occur outside your comfort zone. So there's a big difference between being safe and being uncomfortable, I would say. Okay, let's talk about another. Oh, sorry, Philip. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think to also represent Gen Z well, and I appreciate, our team, I think, does this to say it's really easy to always pick on the small guy or the least experienced team members. And I think our workforce, we've all done that. I talk to boomers. I'll say, what was it like for you when you first started? They're like, oh, it was so hard. Whatever career I was in, right? Everyone assigned me the grunt work and said I was terrible at my job and whatever it was. I was like, yeah. So we've all been Gen Z in a sense. But one thing I think that's interesting is how uncomfortable people are also with Gen Z, which I think is why it's a problem, right? If we had a great solution, we would just fix it. But it's uncomfortable to have someone so different in the workforce. I think one thing that Gen Z brings to the table that is really good is I think they're most inclined to just think out of the box. And there's, I think, less rules with Gen Z. And I think millennials have that also. But I think that one thing that they do bring is just this, like, it doesn't have to be this way. Why is it it can be read as a negative or a positive? Like, well, Why do we do that? There's this easier way to do this thing. Why are we still sending letters, right? Clearly, Reels can give us all the information we need. There's a lot of that too. And I think the more open people are to coaching that and leading that, better, because this is the workforce you have. So how you engage with them is going to be the biggest thing for you as a leader moving forward.
I like that. I was thinking about like translating some of that as like efficiencies. Like I think that Gen Z does think about that stuff a lot of like how can we be more efficient? How can we use our time, get more done in a shorter amount of time, right? Which is like, I think that's awesome. And I think that it translates negatively in terms of like attention span, right? Which is what some of that video, that reel explains, right? Is like the attention span is short. They read less books maybe than they did in 1979 or whatever the year was. But they're on the flip side, like they're also thinking about like, yeah, how can we be more efficient? Technology has impacted Gen Z in that way, but it can also be really beneficial for businesses and organizations moving forward in that way.
It strikes me that a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about here are also universal issues. It's not like Gen Z is the first people to say, well, if I'm uncomfortable with something, I'm just not going to do it. I think it's the way that they're saying they're uncomfortable with it. You know, the Gen Z stereotypical responses say, well, I feel unsafe, so I'm just not going to do that. And expecting to kind of get a pass for that. The millennial way to do that is more like to whine, right? If I'm going to say like, I don't really want, oh, I have to go talk to that person. I don't want to go do that. I'm stereotyping horribly here. I'm sorry, I've already offended several people on this call. I'm sorry, many people. The Gen X way of not doing it is to kind of flow around it. Like, I'm just going to quietly not do it. I'm going to quietly rebel against it. I'm not going to fight you. I'm just going to just not do it. But I'm not going to tell you I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to quietly, it's just not going to happen. Okay, thanks for the feedback. And then just go and not do it. The boomer way of not doing it is they're going to be like, heck, I'm going to go talk to that person. You go talk to that person. I'm going to fight you back. Like, what? That person's being a jerk. You go talk to them. Are you talking to them first? I mean, so there's unhealthy behavior goes across all generations, and those are all unhealthy behavior. So it's not, the generational responses might look different. And I think that's true for all these things that we're going to talk about here. So Diana, you want to give us another example from the Instagram reel?
Yeah. One of the things they said that they were struggling with when they walk in is like, where do you start? There's like no, I don't know, there's no signal for like starting, right? And everything we do is on a computer. So sure, you can sit down in front of a computer, but then like, do you check emails? And are emails even important anymore? Do you go to social media and scroll for a few hours? Do you look at a calendar? Like what do you do? Where do you start?
What's the priority?
What's
Like, how do you
like,
prioritize your work?
yeah, like how you prioritize, how you get into it, how you get engaged with it, like where do you just start? And I think a lot of times they're sort of looking for someone to tell them and to inspire them and to motivate them, right? Like, here's what we're going to do today. Here's why it's important. Here's the right. But you don't get that every day. Some days you just go to work and you have to sit down and you do have to check your email. And so they're kind of saying like, how do we motivate them to do the things that are not the best parts of the job?
That's a great question. And I wonder if that comes from the structure within school coupled with the availability of technology. Like I'm trying to think of like where does that come from? Like
Thinking
the
that, yeah,
schools,
like
the schools
YouTube.
have to respond to like the kids having tech, right? So now they say now's the time you can use your tech. Now's not the time where you can use your tech. I just wonder about that. Bethany, you had a comment on that.
I was thinking like YouTube. Yeah, like what I've observed at least, and I mean even I do some of that too, of like what I'm not told, like then I'm gonna just Google it or YouTube or whatever and say like at least somebody can give me a tutorial on how to do this thing really quick or show me really quick the thing that I need to know. And so I guess if within organizations, if they don't have a good like I don't know, onboarding process, they don't have a person who's sitting with them to say like, hey, how do I help guide them into this role? Or do we have good training mechanisms so that like, if I'm not sitting right next to them, they know where to go to get the answers that they need to do their job?
I really like the question, even like the specific example of like, how do I check my email? It's like that seems like a first. I'm sure a lot of people respond that they're like, "What do you mean? How do you check your email? Like you're supposed to be the younger person who's good at technology, and how do you open it? And how do you manage your inbox and all that stuff?" That's a really great question. That like my generation, Gen Xers, had just evolved into it because I can remember my career started without email, and then email came into it, so we evolved into it. So, but I know a lot of Boomers and Gen Xers who are terrible at managing their email and have terrible systems for doing it and have use their inbox as a to-do list and things like that that have shown like this are very low productive ways. And I've heard a lot of you are like, wait, how else do you do it? Bad ways of managing email. So it's kind of a smart question. Like, when do I check my email? What do you all think? I like the question.
Yeah, I just think that email is evil. I think it's the worst thing invented. I have no idea how people live in email land. I'm kind of a nerd. I just would prefer a person, right? I'm kind of an amalgamation, I guess. But one thing I think that is because there's so many ways you can receive information. I think for a lot of people, sometimes the question is just give me a picture of success. What does that look like? I think that's why we talk about imprinting. And so again, I love how we say this could happen in any generation, but I think what success and failure look like for Gen Z is maybe different. We often talk about what's the badge of honor for Gen Z. It isn't to have 15 unused weeks of vacation. That's maybe more the boomer method. Look at how dedicated I am. Don't you guys understand? Don't you guys see? I care about you and what we're doing. I never leave. My family doesn't know my first name anymore, but I'm here. I'm at work. And for Gen Z, it's this other thing. So I always kind of ask you, like, what is it? And there's a Gen Z leader I meet with regularly who kind of spoke to just this very same thing. We're talking about communication, and so what are some barriers to communication? And they specifically said email. I said, oh, okay. So what does that look like? Oh, well, I just will like look at it. Oh, so what does that mean? And basically, they just let email pile up because it's really stressful. And when I unpack that a little bit more, the quick story of all of it is just there are so many questions in email that take so much time to find answers to that they don't always feel equipped to answer. They have to go talk to someone or they have to take away time to go not focus on their priorities for the day. So we kind of just change it to like, what if you just make it a priority of the day? What if it becomes 2 hours twice a week to do, whatever that might look like. But to your point, just structurally putting that into how do I use my communication tools or how do we do this? And no one ever talked to them about that. So their solution for a long time has just been don't respond until someone yells at me and then I'll respond, which again is not effective, but that probably makes you use your tool even less if that's your solution and no one around you notices it to then ask more and coach you in the right direction.
And again, some people are probably laughing at that when they hear that, but people across all generations don't respond to their emails frequently, and they have different excuses for it, and probably goes on similar lines. But yeah, Diana.
I just think it's sort of fascinating that it's not about the email, right? That I think Gen Z are really smart and they're asking a very basic question, right? They're like, well, how do I check my email? But I don't think that that's really what they're asking. I think they are asking, how does this systemically work within all of the tools that you have given me? And how do I maintain this extra thing when I've already have to maintain these other things, right? And I think it's more about the integration of it and the prioritization of it than it is about the actual like, how do I check my email? They all know how to check email, right? And so I just think that when older leaders are working with younger leaders, sometimes when they ask a question like that, the older leader will take it very literally and then think that the younger leader is stupid when it's really like, no, that's a much deeper question and you should unpack that a little bit more. And so I think that all older leaders tend to do that to younger leaders. And I guess I'm just saying like dig into the question more because they're not asking that basic of a question. They're asking a much deeper, much harder question that almost everyone I know has struggled with throughout history, and they're asking you how you solved it.
There's some really good onboarding, like when we talk about onboard, how do you onboard a brand new employee, somebody who hasn't worked before? There's probably some things you have to consider to share a little bit more. Because I remember my first job, you come in, what you do is you watch everybody else and you start trying to do what they do. And if everybody else is staring at a computer screen, that's a lot harder to try to figure out what do they do? What are you on? What are you checking out? I also think it's really interesting, and Philip, you said it, and I can think of both my kids are Gen Zs, and they both have talked about this recently. I've noticed the Gen Z generation has more access to data and are more quick to look at data. Like Bethany, you brought up like YouTube videos. Like there's not a they think it's weird if you like, I don't know how to do something. You're like, well, just look it up. I don't know what you're talking about. Just look it up, watch a video, and you can do it. That's how they learn how to do everything. And my kids can do some amazing things that I didn't know. Like my daughter can program. I didn't teach her how to program stuff. She just learned how to program because she wanted to get into it. But what they don't do is they have unprecedented access to data. What's really interesting is as a generation, then they have quick access to it, unprecedented access, and they also will decide not to look at it because they don't feel like it. And I think that's really interesting. Like it's going to stress me out. Like both of my kids will talk about like their grades and they'll be like, well, I can't, like when I was in school, you couldn't just look at your grades. There was no access to, you couldn't just look at them. You had to wait till they came out. Like they literally handed papers back to you. That's when you got input on your grades. And then at the end of the semester, sometimes there were surprises that came back. Like, you know, or sometimes some professors would hand out like midterm grades. Like there's a moment where I'm literally handing you a piece of paper that tells you you're getting a B right now or whatever that is. You couldn't check it out. Now you can like go online, you can see it live, like what's happening with the grades. But like both my kids avoid doing that. And Philip, it goes back to what you said, because sometimes they'll say, well, I don't want to stress out. I've got access to all this information. So they've also had to learn to meter the information that comes in because I can get stressed. I can learn about anything, but I don't want to learn about everything because I don't want to go learn that thing. So yeah, that's interesting.
You saying that kind of sparks the idea too. I love how you put it into that data in example, because I think to Diana's story to that example, even that's an employee coming. The good news in that story, they came to their manager. What? They came to their manager and asked a question. So that shows a lot of good things that are happening, and they talked through it. And whether they struggle and come back and work on the problem, or just never come back and keep struggling, the story is being written. But I think a lot of Gen Z doesn't, they're in a culture of data that I can pull data from anywhere. I can find it instantaneous, but I probably don't get that much data from my manager or my team or the people around me. I cannot go to Bethany and just like, I don't have a Bethany barometer as the Gen Z employee at People Centric who reports to Bethany Taff. That includes a conversation or other tools. And I think one of the simplest things we do as a team, we talk about what can I do more of? What can I keep doing the same? What can I do less of? And I love that because that's really good data for me, whatever generation I am. And we use that language with each other, all different generations. And I think when we talk about check-ins and what that can look like as a team, people sometimes freak out because they assume it's a really formal conversation. But those three questions, I think, solve a lot of the challenges, or at least start to give you more information. And so if your Gen Z team knows from their manager, what do they want me to do more of? What should I keep doing the same? What should I do less of? How does that tie into our team goal? Keeping it super simple. I think that can solve a lot of this.
That's really good advice. A simple way to think about that. And I loved your point of saying, well, if they're talking to you, that's good. So be careful. Watch your response to make sure you don't shut that down. Because if you shut that down, they're still feeling the same way. They're just not talking to you about it. So if they feel unsafe or they feel like they don't know what to do next and they don't feel like they can go talk to you about it, I mean, that's ultimately going to end up with them just leaving. And then that would be one of those people that just quits their job one day. And you're like, I don't know. They're just flaky. They don't know why they just leave. Well, they're not flaky. They're leaving because they're missing something. And maybe they didn't tell you what it was, and maybe you missed an opportunity. Maybe the reason they didn't tell you what it was because maybe you reacted the wrong way when they brought something to you. Philip, I was thinking about your interview coming to you. You know, we joke around sometimes about people who interview, and we'll say like, when I interviewed for a job, like I recognize like my job was to try to impress the person who's interviewing me so that I could try to get the job offer and move forward. My thoughts might be I might ask a couple of questions or something in there. Well, you know, millennials kind of started this, but Gen Zs have taken it to a new level where they will interview you back. And like I did an interview with Philip where Philip interviewed me for over an hour, asking me questions about People Centric. But Philip, what I was impressed about going through that was how much of that you retained and you used it, and it made you more engaged in the team. And you recite it, you still come back to it, like you still talk about that. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Philip, but I just wanted to say like the questions, and you're asking questions that maybe other generations wouldn't have asked, but they were good questions and you used them in the right way. So the outcome was really good.
I love that. Maybe it's kind of the question of like, okay, if I'm going to hitch my wagon to yours, let's talk about the cart, the horse, in the wagon before we do it. It was 45 minutes. I do remember when I hung up on the phone, I was like, wow, 45 minutes and some seconds of change. So it was efficient. I felt it. I didn't want to hit an hour. So fact check. But no, I one of the things that was really helpful with that small team consulting for me, just coming to People Centric, there's lots of consulting teams out there in my work before coming here. I'd experienced a lot of them also. So I think I knew very clearly what I did not want to join. And I wanted to make sure, yeah, what is this thing? I really want to understand it because it's new. I don't know if I know everything yet, so I don't want to assume. But what made it easy, and I was already, I would say 85 or 90% on board, but not speaking to our founder, our CEO yet. After that conversation, it was 120% because that's like impossible math. But I was more than 100% engaged because it showed, yes, from the source, from the start, and we're lucky that we have a team size where we can do this. But I really understand what the purpose of all this is, and there's consistency throughout. And to be able to see that in a team really does encourage you, because now I can say truthfully, I'm a part of something that we don't just preach, we really practice what we preach as best we can, and then are open and honest when we don't to make it better. Hence this podcast where you pick on Gen Z and also ask Gen Z, what do we do next? So that I would say that is something very meaningful. So to your point, Don, of not second guessing or shutting that down, and then also helping coach Gen Z, to Diana's point, it reciprocates back up. Gen Z does not have all the answers. And so if you're making assumptions of people ahead of you, also don't do that. I think that's the danger. Anytime we talk about Gen Z or Gen whatever, you can just lump them in. And so no matter who you are, always be curious of just the specific people you're around. That will make you well-rounded.
Like that advice, be curious. And what, Philip, what I heard you say when you talked about the company sounded like engagement to me. So like, is it worth 45 minutes of my time? And sorry for exaggerating or rounding, either way. Uh, what is it worth 45 minutes of my time to earn engagement for a new person that's coming into the team that we're investing a lot in? I think it's absolutely worth that time. So some of it is, it's not just us complaining about Gen Zs here from the workforce. It's saying, how do we all work together better? And how do we embrace those differences? Yeah. Diana, do we want to do one more from the real?
Sure, we could. Um, the one of the other ones that they were talking about on the real, was that they Gen Z struggles to get projects through to completion. They kind of get it to a point and then drop it, which we're business consultants and know that this is not a Gen Z problem. This is like a organizational every problem. So yeah, I think it's interesting that that was something they singled out as schools aren't preparing people for, because I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think no one is prepared for that. So anyway, thoughts on that?
Well, I do know that there are more policies in place now that are much more lenient in terms of completion for students. So I do know that to be true, that it doesn't really matter if you don't complete it. Like it's very, very rare for a student to be failed, especially failed in a grade in lower level academia. And so I think that that's definitely a thing that has changed with this generation, with Gen Z. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add that continues into higher ed as well. I've been surprised with my kids on projects and things, and they'll like go to do a project and they'll submit it, and it's kind of half done. It just looks like that, and I don't know why, but it does seem to be more universally accepted than what I think I remember in school. Although I did go back and look at my senior project recently, I found it. I was cleaning up some stuff, and it had some holes in it. Like I was like, there's some stuff here that wasn't done. But yeah, there. I think the system, and I don't know if that's because of the pressure that teachers feel increasingly in terms of like grades and from parents. And I think parents seem to be increasingly powerful in terms of so it's don't tick off the parent because that throws something at the administrators. The administrators are under threat. I don't know what that is, but definitely I've seen that trend as well.
I think there's a
I
lot
did do
there.
my master's a couple of years ago. It's getting further and further away. I can't believe how long ago it was now. But the phrase that went around during my master's class was, if you pay your fee, you get your C. So like if you pay for school, you get to pass. Like, which I really hated, but also did sort of feel like some of that might be a little true. So maybe there's something there. I don't know. Maybe there's something
I
there.
feel like that's come in handy for one of my children. I think that's probably good. Uh, but yeah,
But
so
it is
then
of an accountability, right? Like it does invoke less accountability in people, whether whatever generation you are, and maybe have had that experience. And yeah, I think to your point, Don, there's lots of reasons. Like our parents probably more powerful in this. Maybe are there less resources given to schools to be able to manage that when students are actually failed for not completing their work? Yeah, I think that's an issue too. Like, I think there's a lot within that, but regardless, yeah, I think that it translates to low accountability coming into the workforce to say, like, is this actually, like, am I actually going to be held accountable for not completing this thing? And what does that even look like? Because maybe I haven't been held to that standard totally.
I would say that while we talk about the trend in the school, I don't see like I don't see Philip. I don't see that in Philip at all. Like that's not a trait I see. So like as we are stereotyping on a lot of these things. So yes, all the things we've talked about, there are people of every generation that buck their own stereotype on this one, and I don't see this trait in Philip whatsoever.
Oh, great.
Um, yeah. So I mean, some of it is like so, but then and I do agree, and I think Diana opened up with this is saying like we see this trait across the board. Like we don't quite finish projects, and we often talk about like especially projects that are changing the company. We do a lot of those, right, with clients, and a lot of times they will come up with the idea and talk about it and come some agreement on the idea and write down the idea, but they get really poor on the installation and make sure it actually happens and circling back to it and make sure that it's been memorialized and all of those types of things. I think those processes are typically poorly defined and aren't done well, which can be our opportunities for I think most organizations to improve on.
Yeah. Well, to your point that you were talking about earlier, it was like people do that differently at each generation. Like I think about this example, like a millennial probably struggles more, speaking as a millennial, with this completion because we were raised with just like the everybody gets a medal thing. So it doesn't matter because you tried, way to go. You tried, and it's okay if you didn't get it done. Like you did your best. So, there is that messaging. And it's like, I'm sure that it's different for X and boomers as well. For what I don't know what it is for them, but
Which I know we talk about this often, but again, why I love our motto, team, client, community, whatever generation you are, whether it's like I need a medal or I need to feel safe. The implications. Okay, great. What does an environment look like though, where you still have a team? Because if I have a really hard day emotionally, which we're all people, we do. If I just don't show up on those days when it's really cold outside, 12 degrees high over the night last night, that was really hard to get in my car, you guys. I had to ice it off this morning. No one thanked me for that. I really would have appreciated that. Some of you have garages where your car is just heated all the time. I'm proud of you, but or you live in Seattle, no such thing as ice exists there in this wonderland. So yeah, but it was hard. I came in and I'm ready for it. But I think those elements of being able to be like, wow, if I didn't come in because ice on the windshield or I don't know how to have a conversation or whatever, it would impact my team. I really like our team. I like what we do. And that, again, tying into that mission of the why, that's why I'm really thankful for our team to do that. And maybe the last thing, I hate being in Gen Z. I hated when people thought I was a millennial. I hate it when people make boomer jokes sometimes, although I make them more about myself. Because I think, again, I try to veer away from labels as much as possible because what the false narrative we all fall into, that idea is then, oh, it's acceptable to say this or be this way. Because that's just where I came from. That's just where I've been. And again, we always talk about people can grow. You can grow. And so if that's where you are, great. But when we talk about coachability and accountability, it's like, can I own this differently though? Then we can work with that and make something different happen. And so I'm glad that we do that and that we talk
Yeah,
about it.
I agree. I think that's well said. And I think that when we talk about different generations, I think sometimes the question I get is, should I tolerate this? And I think the advice, and I think we've said all of this already, is we're saying, be curious. Yes, be curious, but don't coddle. So can we tolerate people not finishing projects? No, You can't. If somebody needs to finish a project, you need to talk about what does finished mean, and you need to coach, and you need to get into that. But if somebody starts telling you like they feel uncomfortable with it, or they're not sure how to do it, or all of that stuff, those aren't. Sometimes we hear excuses, and maybe they are excuses to some extent. But I think you also do have to be curious, and you have to ask questions and say, what is that? Maybe you're asking good questions. Maybe they're smart questions about why we can't accomplish something. Going back to the very first leader that we talked about, oh, you said you're unsafe. Tell me about that. I think that leader showed that they were very curious about the position, not saying, "Oh, you're unsafe. I'm so sorry that you can't." That's coddling, and coddling doesn't lead to engagement. It leads to entitlement, which is a kind of a cousin of it's a lack of alignment, right? We talk about alignment and empowerment is what people centric is. If you don't focus on alignment, which means what does the organization need as a whole, and you only focus on what the individual needs, you tend to get entitlement, which is then the person saying, "Oh, it's really hard. I don't want to do it." And okay, well, you don't have to. Yeah, that's not good for your organization. So yes, can you push back? Yes, you can push back. What are your thoughts? Any final thoughts for the listeners here?
I think it's hard to have a new employee of any generation. And I like what Philip was sort of saying of like, don't put a box around people. Everyone's different. And ultimately, you might not know what generation a person is from. I look very, very young. I could be a Gen Zer. You don't know. I'm kidding. But I'm just saying, like, it probably shouldn't be the first place you start. You should be curious, like he was saying, and ask good questions and dig deeper on questions you think are surfacey and weird and strange. And don't judge. Be curious, not judgmental, right? The Walt Whitman / Ted Lasso quote. I think that's really rings true here.
Yeah, I like that distinguish between a young generation and a green employee, right? We used to in my day, I don't know if you can say that anymore, a green employee, but I used to say that all the time. Like they're just green. That I heard that a lot in manufacturing. They're just green when they come in. That doesn't mean they're bad. It's just like there's things that they have to learn that are things that that if you've had any job anywhere, that are just it's just an experience. You're a freshman when you start your first day of job, and it might be the most freshman experience that you've had since you started kindergarten. There's a lot to learn. You come out thinking you know a lot, but you come in and you really find out all the stuff that you don't really know. I was speaking to a class of college students, and somebody said, "We know all this stuff when we're coming in, and we have all this knowledge. How do we get the employers to respect the knowledge that we have?" And I said, "We'll start by recognizing what you don't know." Start by recognizing that there's a lot of experience that people will have, and maybe you have some knowledge on specific tools or technologies or things like that that maybe you're going to be able to bring into the workforce that's going to be exciting, but don't leave other people behind. Engage people, engage your employer where they are too. Find out what's important to them. Go and humble, be curious yourself. That's just good advice for everybody. So I think that's what we keep coming back to. All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us on this episode. This was fun. This was a fun one. I'm going to go tell Bethany that she did a great job and give her a high five because that's what we need to do. I'm going to reassure Philip that he's doing great and help him make sure if his car is iced up by sitting here through the day, I'll go out and help him scrape it off. Diana, you're on your own. You're doing great. Just do your thing. So thanks everybody for joining us.